We are the tribe from the north, we're brave and we're bold. Defeating our rivals never gets old. Making our way to the Big Sky Conference. Watch out, 'cause here comes the silver and gold. Whoa, whoa. This is Tubbs at the Club for the Vandals of Idaho.
Welcome back, mighty Vandals, to Tubbs at the Club, the Idaho Vandals affiliate on the Big Sky Podcast Network. I'm your host, Dallas Hammer, joined today by the one, the only, Professor Brian Marceau. Brian, how are you doing?
Dude, the conference season opens this week, man. We're almost, look, we're on our fourth week. After this week, we're a third of the way through the season, dude. So I'm stoked, but Jesus, this goes by fast.
Brian leading us into Veggie Talk, just like always. Coming to you from the shadows, the freshly shaven producer seducer, last but not least, Marten Heemstra. Marten, how's it going, man?
It is going good. Today was my Friday at work this week, so I am excited and ready for a nice long 5-day vacation soon.
Ooh, 5-day vacation. Maybe we're going to hear a little bit more about what you're doing a little later on in the show. But before we get to that, and before we get to Around the Bar, curveball right off the top of the show, let's kick it to Brian for the Marceau Minute. Brian, you did not get a chance to react to the first win of the Jason Eck era. Give me 30, 60, 90, 120. I don't know. Go as long as you want. Tell me what you thought about Eck's first win against the dreaded Drake Bulldogs.
Obviously a slow start. This is the only Idaho game against an FCS team where we won 42-14. The result was not really in doubt after the first quarter, and weirdly it was underwhelming, which it is great to have a 42-14 win feel underwhelming. Never thought I'd be saying that talking about Idaho. But other than that, look, we'll talk about Anthony Woods. He looks like he's the real deal. This is just a wild Big Sky thing. A lot of just with coaching changes, different guys get different opportunities and produce. Guys like Michael Graves, who was not on anyone's radar to be a big player this season. He is. Jermaine Jackson, not on anyone's radar to be the number one target. Well, again, we're 3 weeks in. He's clearly Idaho's top receiver at this point. Wild to see those. Wild to see how Idaho has some guys stepping up. Also, pretty wild to me that we're heading into NAU. Spoiler alert, Vegas has Idaho as a narrow favorite already on the road. How long has it been since Idaho was a favorite anywhere on the road? And that's after 2 good road showings this season. So, big picture, look, we beat the shit out of Drake. We needed to beat the shit out of Drake. So Idaho did what they needed to. I guarantee Jason Eck's going to have some things they need to coach up, which, hey, honestly, so we can quit getting to me talking about last week. It might be a good thing that Idaho had a couple things that did not work out as well last week in a win to get addressed and tune up heading into conference season instead of just kind of gliding in. And then, maybe some of the knots that need to be untied are still there.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more with the need to clean some things up. If you're listening to us live, we thank you. If you are wanting to hear more about our Drake Bulldogs and the first win of the Eck era, producer Marten and I actually reacted to that last week, just shortly after the game. If you're listening on podcast services, you can find it. It's just the episode before this one. If you're on YouTube, it's pretty easy to find it. We're not going to talk any more about that. We've already covered it. It's time to look forward, time to look towards NAU. This is Around the Bar, brought to us by Hughes River Expedition. I'm going to set the scene very quickly about NAU, and I'm going to kick it to Brian to take this wherever you want to go. Just a quick recap of NAU for the folks. NAU so far 1-2 on the season. Their lone win is over Sam Houston, who's transitioning from the FCS to the FBS. They had a close loss to North Dakota last week. Lost it actually just in the final possessions. Less than a minute left, and they blew that one. And then they got shellacked by Herm Edwards and the Arizona State Sun Devils 40-3 just before Herm Edwards put in such a poor performance he got fired. So that's what NAU season has looked like. They're coached by Chris Ball in his 4th season. He's 13-18 overall, 9-12 in the Big Sky Conference, but maybe most importantly, he's 2-1 against Idaho in his time there. Their offense is 11 personnel, so that means that they have 1 tight end, 1 running back, 3 receivers. That's pretty much what they do. They're trying to air it out now. They did bring back 9 starters on their offense this year, so their offense from last year, pretty much the same guys. We'll get into that. Their defense is kind of a weird multiple hybrid scheme. They're kind of a 3-3-5 and a 4-2-5. They have their edge rusher also stands up at linebacker at times. So really weird defensive thing. But again, Chris Ball's a defensive guy. He does weird things. They brought back 6 returners from that team that got 5 wins last year. So a lot of the same guys we saw in the last few years. But Brian, what do you want to talk about first about the dreaded NAU Lumberjacks?
Look, the takeaway for NAU for me is 3 weeks into this season. I mean, maybe throughout the week 1 against Arizona State, they just got their asses kicked. Northern Arizona's looked surprisingly strong on the defensive side of the ball. Look, this is the same Northern Arizona team that back in 2019, Mason Petrino threw like around 600 yards, over 600 yards against. This is the same NAU team.
The infamous haters gonna hate game, which Tubbs at the Club also famously sold t-shirts for. Anyways, sorry for filibustering you there, Brian.
That's cool, man. You guys want to talk about our merch? We can talk about our merch. So look, NAU for years, and even in 2021, NAU, depending on what passing defense stat you looked at, they were either bottom 2 in the Big Sky or worst in the nation, like pass defense efficiency. Early in the season, team looks a lot stronger defensively. The 10-3 win over Sam Houston State's the big one, but like a little asterisk here. Sam Houston State is reputationally a really strong FCS team. Sagarin has them as number 158 in the Big Sky. Sagarin has Sam Houston at 158 overall. If that's in the Big Sky, that would be just above NAU at 159 and just below Idaho at 135. So that win maybe not quite as big a deal as we thought. But then Northern Arizona looked pretty damn solid against North Dakota from the Missouri Valley this last week. RJ Martinez finally gave himself a game that he had not had early in the season. So I guess the broad takeaway for me on NAU, they're a lot more solid than I thought when we did like our preview episode of the season, where they looked like, hey, they might be able to score okay, but they're a dumpster fire defensively. Honestly, they're a little bit in inverse right now.
And that's you mentioned RJ Martinez, the 2021 Big Sky Conference Freshman of the Year. Honestly, one of the top returning quarterbacks in the Big Sky because most teams have a brand new quarterback this year. Last year, his numbers were pretty good: 17, 13 yards, 14 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 62% completion percentage, but only made 220 throws in those 7 games that he did start. This year in 3 games, he's already thrown the ball 116 times, so they are asking him to open it up a whole lot more. He's completing 67% of his passes, which is nice. You'd love to see that, but he's got 630 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 4 picks. He did throw a couple of those picks against Arizona State, so you'd expect an FCS quarterback that's very young to look pretty bad against an FBS school most of the time. But offensively, Kevin Daniels is kind of the most important player on that offense. He's their running back, but he actually got injured last week. He put up over 1,000 yards last year, 7 touchdowns, all Big Sky second team, and then he got hurt last week. He's got 113 yards and a touchdown so far this year, but again, he did get hurt. Junior George Robinson ended up filling in for him after that, and that dude's got 21 carries for 37 yards. So the belief that NAU was going to score and not be able to stop anybody, that's been the exact opposite this year. Their defense has looked great. Their offense was already not performing particularly well, and then their best player just got hurt. They do have redshirt senior receiver Stacy Chukwuemezi. Really hoping I pronounced that correctly. The dude's last name is awful. Perfect. We'll go with that. I'm just going to call him Stacy from this point on. Probably their best receiver. He has not played this year. He actually only played a couple of games last fall, got hurt, is still recovering from that. They have a bunch of other receivers that have a couple different like honorable mention in the Big Sky numbers. They have some decent players, but they're missing their biggest receiver. So their offense is going to be a big question mark for Idaho this week. If Stacy Chukwuemezi, however that was pronounced, if he comes back, Brian, do you think Marcus Harris is going to lock him down, or is this game going to look a little bit more along the lines of what NAU has done to Idaho in the past, putting up 50 points?
Well, NAU didn't put up 50 points last season against Idaho. NAU didn't put up 50 points in the spring season either. However, like, look, point taken. Of Idaho's lost a few against NAU. Vandals clearly should not have lost those games. Look, another anomaly too for NAU. They outgained North Dakota by about 140 yards and still found a way to lose the game. But narrowly to your receiver question, I don't think a single receiver on NAU is going to be what makes the difference in this game, because NAU spreads the ball out a decent amount. They have 3 receivers this right now with receptions between 15 catches and 20 catches. So Chuckle Menzie, he's certainly an all Big Sky talent, but I mean, RJ Martinez would have to be, productive at a level he hasn't really been this season. Again, he's had 2 FCS games. Between those two, he's averaging about 300 yards per game. He's at 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. I think he's better than that output right now. But I guess to me, the part that if I'm a Vandal and I'm concerned about Idaho losing this game, because I am, NAU has been solid defensively, and look, we just talked about offensive struggles. 13 points in the first 8 quarters. They did start to put it together a little bit against a relatively solid team, North Dakota, last week. And Idaho Idaho last week showed a couple areas where they can be exploited. Struggled early in the rush against Drake, which is a surprise. We'll get to something that might change that. But also, if NAU's been relatively strong defensively, look, Idaho really struggled in 3rd down situations against Drake. And I got to tell you, NAU's defensively is going to be better than the Drake Bulldogs.
Absolutely, and it's all going to start up front for them. They have 3 different brothers headlining their defensive line. The Kawedi brothers. For those who follow the FBS, you might be recognizing that name. One of the 2 brothers, there's 3 brothers, 2 twins, and then a younger brother. One of the twins, Cosmos Kawedi, actually played at Wazoo in 2019. Ended up, I think he had 20 or 25 tackles. He played a decent amount. He was one of the biggest recruits that Wazoo's ever had, actually, and then ended up deciding to transfer back to play with his twin brother at NAU. So Cosmos, defensive end. His brother Eloy is the other defensive end. Eloy is the one who is probably the one to watch out for. He had 45 tackles last year, 11 and a half tackles for loss, 4 sacks. Played really well in 2021. He's, I think, 5th on the team in tackles so far in 2022. Cosmos doesn't quite have the statistical breakdown, but it's because Cosmos is also the guy who flips out and plays linebacker a little bit. So, again, that weird 3-3-5, 4-2-5 system where the guys sometimes hand down, sometimes hand up, who just moving all over the field. And then their little brother is a redshirt freshman, Richard. He's just a backup for the 2 of them, but still, those are the guys that stir the drink for their defensive line. They do have a couple interior linemen that don't put up a bunch of big numbers because they're interior offensive linemen, but the 2 of them combined are well over 600 pounds. So a whole bunch of size up front for them. And then their 2 linebackers, Heston Lametta and Jossie Wilson. Neither of those guys came into the year with particular accolades or really any playing time at NAU. Mostly guys that had just been deep reserves in the previous years. But the 2 of them leading the team in tackles with 26 and 21 respectively. Their front 7 realistically is kind of the scary part of their team, especially because there's not a whole lot of seniors in the 2 deep. Especially on the D line, they have 1 senior in the 2 deep. Almost everybody's a junior, sophomore, or a freshman. So a team that's probably going to give Idaho fits over the next couple of years, as they do have a bunch of young talent on that defense.
The promising thing for Idaho so far, relative to what you talked about, though, is Idaho's been effective defensively at forcing turnovers. That is not really the case for NAU. NAU forced 2 turnovers against Sam Houston. That was part of what kept the game 10-3. Forced 0 turnovers against North Dakota. So, I mean, look, we're Vandals. We can handle that 1 forced turnover per game. That would certainly not track with where Idaho's at. And keep in mind, Idaho has certainly played a tougher schedule than NAU. Northern Arizona has actualized this. Northern Arizona clearly has the better win when you compare head-to-head Idaho, NAU. But, the thing that's reassuring for me is against Drake, rush defense was the first thing that looked a little bit rough early on. Now, in the second half, things turned around. Name for you guys to pay attention to. It's a new new lineman transfer from Snow College. He was an All-American at Snow College, late arrival to Idaho. Tuyumi Iono, number 99, 6 foot, 325 pounds. Dude is essentially looked immovable against Drake. Had a clear impact on the game from the moment he started taking more snaps in the second half. You have to expect the coaching, if we can figure that out, Tubbs at the club, Jason Eck and Rob Orich have figured that out. And a guy who just got in late is going to start to get more reps. That could also be one of the cures for Idaho's weakness on the line, you'd say, is it was size. We had speed. We have athleticism. Well, this dude is an athlete who had size, and relative to how Idaho has been broadly in 3 games, strong defensively, that to me is going to help take care of a little bit of the rush concern. The other is, I'm at this point writing off the first quarter, as Idaho for some reason was just not up for the Drake game, because guys like Marcus Harris and Jeremiah Salam as well just looked sharper in weeks 1 and 2 than weeks 3. I mean, honestly, we've been raving on the show about Marcus Harris. He got picked on a little bit in the Drake game. He got it together, but there's definitely a few plays where Harris's guy was the one targeted. Jeremiah Salam, missed a sack. He had a couple times he was targeted. That all stabilized. I guess if we're going to get the rushing one, our rush defense looks like there's reason to believe it's better. Plus, NAU has not been able to run the football this season. Plus, NAU's down their best running back. I guess that is, you reference fits that NAU may be giving Idaho. Those are things I'd point to about why, like, not disagreeing with your point about fits, but also there is a little bit of strength on weakness matchup for Idaho in this game. In particular, NAU, I don't see how they run the ball against Idaho.
Well, and that's the terrifying thing if you're an NAU fan or one of the handful of them out there that are for some reason listening to this podcast. The offensive line of NAU should be a whole lot better than it is when you talk about running the football. Their 2 guards and their center positions are the ones that are locked in. Jonas Leader leads the group. I know that was a stupid pun, and I regret saying it the second I did it. Spring 2021, he was all Big Sky second team. Fall 21, he was all Big Sky third team. He was on the preseason team going into this season. He's started every game for them since 2019 at either right guard or right tackle. He started the first game at right tackle this season and then has moved to right guard. Their center, Jalen Hooper, he's a redshirt junior. He's been a 3-year starter at the center position. Redshirt senior PJ Putasi is going to start at probably the left guard position, and he started most of last year. The interior of their line should be their strength, and they can't run the football. And then their 2 tackles are just a rotating door of freshmen and sophomores. They kind of have the same thing Idaho has going on. They have a couple of like entrenched, locked-in seniors, and then a bunch of young guys that are kind of just walking in, not off the street, but just seems like game to game they have a different starting offensive line. So that does add up very well for Idaho, especially when you talk about how good Anthony Woods has looked. I mean, no slight against Roschon Johnson. I think Roschon is still a blast. He's been a great Vandal, and Anthony Woods looks legit. And not to curve this away from NAU talk, but Brian, what do you think Anthony Woods could end up doing in this game?
Well, Anthony Woods, he's in a timeshare essentially with Roschon Johnson, and Woods has been averaging not quite twice the yards per rush that Roschon Johnson is, but close to twice. That's the comparison, is twice. So against a team like NAU, well, asterisk here, of course, again, is how real is Northern Arizona defensively, you know, against North Dakota. North Dakota's kind of, you know, they're kind of a rushing oriented team, not completely, but, you know, they rushed 25 times against NAU for 112 yards. That's, you know, 4.5 yards per rush. That's not, I mean, that's not awful, but no team's going to write home about saying, hey, we surrendered 4.5 yards per rush, but that's not getting gashed or anything like that. And then Sam Houston State, they averaged 4.1 yards per rush. Again, not great numbers from the NAU side, but not terrible. But I mean, look, the announcing team talked about this. If you watch the game on SWX, not in person, Anthony Woods has a way of making it look like he makes someone miss on virtually every single carry. So I expect we're going to continue to have that, you know, slight edge in rushing the ball a little bit more than we pass it. And I expect Anthony Woods, we're kind of seeing his carry ratio go up a little bit each week. Not a ton. I expect it's going to be stay in that like 50 to 60% range in comparison to like Roschon Johnson. But no, he's definitely an impact player to look at. Thing I wanted to bring up, yank it back now so that we're all over the place. NAU rushing the football in their 2 FCS games against Sam Houston, 35 rushes for 59 yards. That's 1.7 yards per rush for NAU. Against North Dakota, 35 rushes for 124 yards. That's 3.5 yards per rush. So even in their best rushing game in the 2 FCS games we've seen so far, NAU not particularly effective, which you'd expect a team like Idaho, who is improved in their pass defense this season, even though we just talked about those moments against Drake. I mean, you'd have to say that's another way where Idaho probably feels okay heading into this game is for NAU to win. They're probably going to have to pass well. And RJ Martinez has been okay, but he hasn't in the 2 FCS games. He hasn't looked like the guy he was last season.
No, not at all. He did look a lot better against North Dakota. He at least had more touchdowns than turnovers, which was the first time in a while. But you talk about how poorly NAU has been running the ball. One of the things that I wanted to point out, Kevin Daniels, before he got hurt, 6.8 yards a carry against North Dakota. So they were looking a little bit better with him in. And then the second he went down and George Robinson stepped in, Robinson had 14 carries for 24 yards. So if Daniels doesn't play, I don't have a whole lot of faith in NAU being able to run the ball against an improving Idaho run defense. So that's quite nice to see. I think the only other thing from the NAU side, and I'm going to, again, just shift gears here again. The only other thing from the NAU side we haven't really touched on is their secondary and how well Idaho's going to throw the ball against them. Their secondary is kind of in a weird spot right now. So they play 5 DBs. Their axe position, which is, the kind of the rover, or every team has their own name for them if they're doing the 5 defensive back system. But former All Big Sky talent Anthony Sweeney started the first game for them in that 5th defensive back position. Got injured there's no update on his status, but he didn't play in either of the last 2 games. I would expect he's not going to play against Idaho. So he's been replaced by a sophomore who has 8 total tackles this year. So already they're a little bit weak in the corner DB market there. Their other 2 corners, George Steele transferred in from Jacksonville State. He's got 15 tackles this season, but no pass breakups, no interceptions, nothing like that. And then Colby Humphrey, he's a sophomore. He does have 2 pass breakups, but their corners are certainly not a Marcus Harris level like game changer. And then you look at their other corner, kind of a depth guy, Alonzo LJ Davis. I don't know where you get LJ out of Alonzo. If anybody notices that name, it's because he was actually with Southern Utah in 2021, was spring All Big Sky second team. So they have a couple guys on the defense that are decent. They also have Morgan Vest at the safety position, and he's got a million different accolades. But I don't know. I don't know what's going on with NAU's defense. They statistically hold teams to a pretty good amount of points. You'd think you'd be able to win most games, but they have 1 single turnover or 1 single interception, I should say. Brian, what do you think about? Is it going to be McCoy or is it going to be Lane? What are you thinking we see out of the Idaho quarterbacks this week?
Oh, it's definitely Giovanni McCoy. He's a starter, but the playing of Jack Lane. Look, we had Taryn on last week. We had Taryn on like a month or so before, and before the season started, he said, "Look, X said Lane's going to play 4 games," and we both talked about it last week. Said Lane's going to expect Lane to play. He's going to play. I would expect we're going to see Jack Lane play. I'd expect it's going to be like this last week where Jack Lane against Drake. This was not mop up duty. This was scheduled to make sure the dude got some experience. I'd expect we're going to see that again, but our understanding is the goal is to redshirt Jack Lane. So he's played 1 game. He's got 3 left, which means, look, McCoy is the understood starter, who against Drake had a bit of a breather. So this is another game where I think Giovanni is going to have a good chance to continue to make the case, because this will be a story for us to follow. Giovanni's a redshirt freshman. McCoy is a true freshman. If Coach Eck and staff are liking Jack Lane enough to be playing him like this with McCoy, no one should assume next season's quarterback starter is understood, even with Giovanni playing pretty well through the first 3 games of the season. So I guess, look, watch that we're still going to have 2 quarterbacks play, but it's not precisely a 2 quarterback system because Lane had 4 drives against Drake, something like that, 2 drives in the first half. Then he didn't come back in until mop-up duty. But this will be another chance for Giovanni to have some moments for him to make the case. I mean, we've seen him in moments look better. And I got to say, against Drake, he should have looked better. But a little bit of the concerns from the first 2 weeks about, hey, we have a drive in the first quarter, then nothing happens until late in the fourth. That was obviously a non-issue. So I expect this week, we're going to see a little bit more, not completely the guy we saw against Drake, because NAU's better than Drake, but closer from Giovanni to what we saw against Drake than what we saw weeks 1 and week 2.
I would expect the same. The one thing you'd hope for is, and we've talked about it a little bit, and Marten and I talked about it on the other show. 3 for 14 for Idaho last week on third down. That is a really concerning number, especially for a quarterback that obviously there is maybe not a competition, but there is obviously a play here to get Jack Lane 4 games to preserve his red shirt, give him enough time.
It's kind of a glacial competition.
That's exactly what it is. This feels like this is setting up the quarterback competition in 2023. But you don't want to be the guy that's leading the team to 3 of 14 on fourth down against a vastly inferior opponent. Sorry, it's late. Oof. So I would expect to see Idaho's offense run. Maybe they're not going to put up the same amount of points they did against Drake. I'd love it if they did. I don't expect that. But I do expect Idaho to sustain drives a little bit longer and not have to rely on converting fourth downs to keep the ball rolling. So,
hey, about what you said about needing to convert on fourth downs, we got to talk a little bit about Thomas Ford and the special teams coordinator Thomas Ford and his special teams players absolutely beat the shit out of Drake. Fantastic showing. Field goal, 4 field goals, block punt, and a punt return for a touchdown. That special teams footprint is honestly what some of the best Big Sky teams do. Like Montana reliably gets points defensively in special teams. Weber State, absolutely the same thing. The asterisk, though, is even though Ricardo Chavez as a field goal kicker looks like a pro to me in terms of the confidence I have when Chavez steps up, Idaho can't be kicking 4 field goals against NAU. That number can maybe be 1 or 2, but if we're getting that close, we just can't have the third down conversions like that make Idaho believe we need to settle for the field goals. Because sure, against Drake, that's okay. But if you haven't figured out as a listener that Northern Arizona is clearly a solid Big Sky team at this point, I don't know what else to say, because this is a game where Idaho certainly has some margin for error, not like the Washington State game. But if Idaho's going to struggle on third downs like we did against Drake, a clearly inferior team compared to NAU, that's one of the ways Idaho shoots itself in the foot. And we start to see a game maybe get away from Idaho in a way that on paper, I don't think anyone should expect it will.
No, and you kind of alluded to it there a little bit. NAU historically is kind of the team that everybody judges themselves against. If you're better than NAU, you've got a shot at the playoffs. If you're worse than NAU, you're fucked and you're not going anywhere. Is this going to be the same kind of thing, Brian? If Idaho gets a win this week, can we think this is a team that's going to contend for playoffs?
We're in the run of what I believe is the most important stretch for Idaho in the season. It's the first 3 weeks of absolutely winnable games Idaho should be favored in. Beat the shit out of Drake, got 1. We're favored against NAU right now, depending on where you look at, by as high as -3 that I've seen, which, hey, for a road game relative to what Idaho is, that's not bad. And then Idaho has Northern Colorado for homecoming next week. If Idaho can go 3-0 in those games, suddenly we just have to win the games we should and pick off a questionable game or 2, and the playoffs are realistic. But if we're in the easier part of our schedule right now, we don't have room to lose games. Because look, if Idaho's going to lose to a team like NAU, then suddenly you look at that UC Davis and Eastern back-to-back weeks later in the season. And if Idaho can handle a solid team like NAU, you can understand where further momentum might lead us to be at a point that we can beat an Eastern and or a UC Davis. But if we can't put these okay teams away, then we can't separate to be at least the top of that second tier in the conference, which if Idaho's contending in the playoffs, the only place to be is the top of that second tier.
Absolutely, and it starts with beating NAU, and not just squeaking past NAU, but putting it on NAU. We'll get into score predictions, and we'll get into actually breaking down the game here in just a second. But this is really the hinge point here. Of obviously we're in year one of a quote unquote rebuild, or even a retooling, if that's what you want to call it. I would say most Vandal fans at this point, at least the ones that are paying attention. And diehards like all of our listeners here, I would think everybody's probably pretty high on Jason Eck and how things are going so far. But typically, when you bring a new coach in, you're expected to lose a bunch of games. We're going to get into that when we get into Big Sky Pick'em.
You're not talking about Idaho State, are you?
Oh, see, that was kind of where I was headed. That actually the Super Bowl of the Big Sky this weekend, featuring a couple of young coaches that are known for losing a bunch of games. So with that said, if Idaho loses this game, it's not doom and gloom. Like, again, this is a rebuilding team. Getting to the playoffs in year one is crazy talk. It'd be incredible, and there's definitely a shot that it happens. But this feels like the game that I'm already starting to talk myself into tempering expectations, because historically in the Big Sky, since they came back, and I know it was with Petrino, Idaho doesn't win games on the road. Idaho doesn't win the games that it looks like they should be competitive in. I'm steeling myself for disappointment, Brian. Tell me why I'm right or why I'm wrong.
At least you're consistent too, because in our preseason episode, you picked this as a game for Idaho to lose, which look, that's not written in blood. We have evidence about things changing. We'll get to that. Reasons to be confident about Idaho are, first, in 3 games, this is not an Idaho team that is just face planting games away or face planting its way out of being competitive. Of course, we've had some penalties that mattered. Jeremiah Jackson had a personal foul against Drake, absolutely hurt. But Idaho, the character of a team, personality of a team. This is a team that fights. This is a team that's frisky. And even if you look at Drake, Idaho struggled early. It was for a quarter. Like, people were anxious because attendance wasn't quite what we all wanted it to be, and because Vandals have real PTSD. But look, the team struggled for a quarter, and then it was all Idaho after the first Drake drive of the second quarter. That's 3 quarters of getting together after a slow start. So the first thing I'd say is the character of this team is, I don't think they're going to beat themselves, at least as aggressively, #OnlyTubs, as previous teams for Idaho have done. Second, the defensive improvements are real. Even when we struggled against Drake early, those things got corrected. The rush defense was much better. We referenced Iono as impactful in the rush defense, but we saw the rush defense essentially fix itself after struggling with Drake's O-line early. And look, the pass defense has been solid for we've played 12 quarters. It's been solid for 11 or 10 and a half. Take away the Indiana third quarter and the first quarter against Drake. So defensively, that's a lot of good quarters. And on the offensive end, look, Giovanni has been steady. Giovanni is certainly not making as many mistakes as you might expect a redshirt freshman to make relative to how much he's played. I mean, look, if you look at Giovanni McCoy, 5 touchdown passes to two turnovers, 65% completion percentage, completing run about 2 out of every 3 passes, plus not throwing picks. Honestly, it's just getting probably a little bit of the play calling stabilized. I thought Idaho looked a little bit more aggressive in the second half against Drake and both rushing and passing. But you look through Idaho's strengths, and though you're anxious about the game, this is also a game where if Idaho clicks the way we've seen Idaho click for multiple quarters against good teams, you can also understand a world where Idaho wins us by 14. And we're not, by the third quarter, we don't really feel anxious. We're getting stoked for for conference season starting at 1-0 and having two of those 3 early wins that we absolutely need just locked down.
Something I want to touch on that you mentioned kind of at the very beginning of the talk is Idaho's pass defense and looking improved, and had a couple rough quarters there, but being improved. I don't know if this number has even fully set into me. I saw this when I was preparing the outline earlier. Idaho's opponents are averaging 186 yards a game through the air. That's against Wazoo with Cam Ward and Eric Morris, who were chucking it around for 45 points a game in the FCS last year, against Indiana, who realistically goes with 0-1 personnel. They have a tight end, but he realistically plays as a receiver. They basically play 4 receivers all the time at this point. And then Drake, obviously weaker opponent, but Idaho held 2 Power 5 offenses that throw the ball all over the field to 215, I think, with Cam Ward and the Cougs, under 200 with Indiana. Now, obviously, they both ran the ball right down Idaho's throat, and that's part of the adjustment that was made, was run it right down their throat and chew up the clock that way and get the ball just moving that way. But a lot different discussion going into Big Sky play than last year, where we were talking about does Idaho have the worst Big Sky passing defense? That is absolutely not the case. That will absolutely not be the case by the end of this year. So I think it's a pretty good sign for what our predictions are likely to be.
Well,
so with that,
throw one more thing in pass wise, because look, maybe my experience of watching the game was different than yours, Dallas. What do you think the stat line was of the Drake quarterback? I'm not trying to say the Drake quarterback was fantastic, but he looked pretty good in the first quarter. Overall, sub 50% completion percentage, passed for 0 touchdowns, threw a pick, 150 total yards on 21 attempts. So look, even with the struggling early, the guy had a terrible stat line. If Giovanni McCoy has that stat line, our next discussion is like, well, maybe we should have seen more Jack Lane or something like that. But look, those are some of the kind of lines Idaho has given up against it from the pass side. So I guess that's part of why I feel pretty okay about this. Jason Eck in his press conference heading into the Drake game, he described Idaho as a clearly okay football team. Those are me paraphrasing, but he said Idaho has looked like it's made the developmental step from beyond the last couple teams, when Idaho is clearly a bad football team. You might say underperforming, but whatever. The record was bad. He described some of the differences between okay teams and good teams, about the ability to handle tough situations, third down conversions. We didn't change anything there, but also the ability to not beat yourself when games get look like they could get out of hand. I think this is the kind of game where if Idaho's going to take that developmental step to like beyond okay, that's NAU is a great team to put those to take those training wheels off and to take the lessons like I talked about earlier about how maybe it's not bad that Idaho struggled a little bit more early against Drake than you'd expect, because the coaches have some more points of emphasis to really hammer in that Idaho can't play exactly that way we did this last week and expect we're going to handle Northern Arizona. But I feel comfortable with how Idaho is worst case scenario an okay team. We're playing another worst case scenario okay team. I feel a little bit better about the talent we trot out.
Guys, we're going to pick the score of the game in just a moment, but first, let me tell you a little bit about Hughes River Expeditions. If you're looking for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation, don't look past your backyard. Venture into the largest protected wilderness in the continental United States, located right here in the great state of Idaho. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River of No Return, the Salmon River Canyons, or the Selway. And you can even check out special trips like one to see the Perseid meteor shower. Camp on pristine beaches, run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in beautiful natural hot springs, take in the history along the river, and fish some of the most remote stretches of river in the entire country. You just bring your clothes and let HRE handle the rest. Hughes River Expeditions has been Vandal owned and operated since 1976, and they're ready to take you on a vacation of a lifetime. What are you waiting for? Find out what it's like to grab the paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call them now at 800-262-1882. Again, that's 800-262-1882, or check them out at hughesriver.com. Marten, producer Marten Heemstra, jumping back onto the show. Marten, any hot takes to give us about NAU, or do you want to just jump right into picking the score?
I got no hot takes. Let's just jump right into predictions.
All right, well, I'm going to throw it to you first since you've been on the bench for the last 40 minutes. Marten, NAU or Idaho, and tell us the score.
Wait, we're going NAU Idaho first?
Yeah, we're going to do it.
Ooh. I'm going to go 28-21 Idaho.
Mr. Marceau.
31-24 Idaho.
And guys, I'm going to go with 24-21 Idaho. If anybody checked out the NAU sports show this week, I jumped on with Casey Everett and gave a prediction. I did tell him that I did pick NAU to win this game going into the season, and I told him 24-21. I'm not sure if he understood that I meant Idaho 24-21, but we're all in agreement. Idaho going to win this game. We've got some different comments here. Nick Weber jumping in, Vandals 31-24. Kurt Borchardt, Vandals 34, NAU 17. Patty Frerks 24-16 Idaho. Looks like everybody is all on board. Vandals getting the win on the road this weekend in Flagstaff. Steve Kurtz 34-31 Vandals. Taylor Cash 52-28 Idaho. Colin Hughes Colin Hughes, thank you very much. 30-24 Idaho. We got everybody jumping on the Idaho train this weekend. So let's quickly get into the rest of the Big Sky. Next big game here, we've got Montana State at Eastern Washington. Marten, I'm going to kick it to you first.
I have developed a sort of a hot soft spot for Eastern Washington. It seems weird for me to say that coming from where we were 3 or 4 years ago. I have coworkers that have talked me up and that said Eastern's going to be good. Has made me think Eastern might actually have a chance this year, but it's Montana State. They're still going to win comfortably against Eastern Washington.
Professor Brian Marceau.
I'm going to say Montana State. And first, I'm going to plug myself, guys. If you want a rundown of every Big Sky game every week, check out the Big Sky Podcast Network Power Ranking show produced by the show. It's done pretty archaically. But anyway, if that's the only show I know of that runs through the entire Big Sky, it comes from us. Montana State has some pretty serious issues in terms of running back health. They're down to about their fifth string running back. Honestly, their top running back is listed as a quarterback. He's not going to play quarterback, but it lets Montana State have some weird looks, as then they have two guys, Tommy Millant, Sean Chambers, who can run and pass. But my real concern here is that Eastern Washington, they cannot defend the run. And that's, even with injuries, that's going to be what Montana State leans on. Gunnar Talkington for Eastern will look much, much better than he did against Oregon, because, I mean, how could he not? He was Big Sky Player of the Week 1. But I'd say Montana State is going to pick up a win. That's still a real strong team, even with injuries.
Yeah, and Eastern, it's tough to project Eastern because, again, they did just go get their teeth kicked in by Oregon, and they're going to get their teeth kicked in by Florida. They have worse body bag games than Idaho did. But until Montana State proves that they are not one of the top 4, 3, 2 teams in the country, you have to pick Montana State. Even on the road, they're just top to bottom. I think they're a better team than Eastern, and not to slight Eastern, but Montana State is the cream of the crop along with Montana, and it's like that mostly every year. Got to go with Montana State here. So speaking of the Montanas, we've got top 5 Portland State taking on the University of Montana. The weird relationship between Bobby Houck and Bruce Barnum is, I'm sure, going to be talked about by a bunch of people, and Dots Pretzels are going to see sales go through the roof this weekend. Marten, who are you going to pick?
I have picked this game once right before, back in, I want to say 2018 or 2019. I cannot remember for the life of me. I'm sticking with my pick as always, Portland State.
Now, I will never pick Portland State to beat Montana, especially with how the Grizz have handled everyone they've played this season, including 2 Missouri Valley teams. San Diego State transfer quarterback Lucas Johnson, that's who Montana starts. he looks like the perfect Bobby Hauck quarterback as a solid passer who's not taking a ton of shots down the field, but can also run. Montana's running back room is looking a little more steady than it did last season. Plus, man, skill position, Montana's got a lot of guys who could, let's say they might not be the number one receiver on a lot of Big Sky teams, but they have like 4 or 5 guys who'd be the number 2, which makes it pretty damn hard to know which weapon's going to get you. And then still look, they have linebacker who might be best in the league, Patrick O'Connell, this week's Big Sky Conference Defensive Player of the Week. There's no way that you can take Portland State over Montana. Dante Sachere he can't fit tight enough needles for this. And even if he could, it probably doesn't matter. Montana's that good.
Yeah, I know that Marten will never pick against the team playing against Montana. There's a really drunk way of saying that Martin's not going to pick Montana. Sorry, it's late. Montana is so much more talented than Portland State, and Portland State might be fine. They might be middle of the road. Even if something goes real crazy, they could be a top 5 program in the Big Sky this year. They have a very deep senior laden roster, but not a chance. It's Montana. They're going to steamroll these guys. And I've been doing a terrible job hosting here. All of our commentators in the YouTube comments, shout out to Taylor, Patrick, Nick, Kurt, Steve, Colin, the whole gang. Jack Schneider's in there. Jalen Drake's in there. Everybody's kind of falling in the same as us here. Montana State big, Montana big. I see a couple of different FTG comments in here. It's gonna be Montana, guys. This is not the kind of game that Montana's gonna lose. So next up, we go to Sacramento State against Group of 5 Colorado State, the one out of conference game this week. Marten, I'm going to go to you first. Sac State or Colorado State?
I don't know. WSU handled them like a couple last weekend. Handled Colorado State last weekend. I think I'm gonna do it. My pick'em record this year is not good. I'm gonna go Sacramento State this year. I think they pull it out against Colorado State.
Now Martin's onto something. This is a questionable game right now. Colorado State doesn't look particularly tough. They just looked much worse than Idaho in losing at Washington State. Colorado State also got their ass kicked by number 8 Michigan, but hey, they're supposed to. One win came over Middle Tennessee State, 34-19. Sacramento State offensively has been on point both games this season. There is no learning curve for Troy Taylor this year. 56 points in week 1 for Sac State versus Utah Tech last week. 37 points against a solid Northern Iowa team. I'm still going to pick Colorado State just because on average Mountain West teams should be picked over Big Sky teams, but I don't feel that great about this pick either, Marten. This, to me, it doesn't have the Utah State losing to Weber 35-7 vibe, but Colorado State lost to an FCS team last year in South Dakota State. Sacramento State is not that far off ranking-wise from South Dakota State, so Colorado State, but a lot more narrow than I think a lot of people expect.
So this is the hardest game of the week for me to predict because it's a Group of 5 school. They should be favored. They should pummel just about any FCS school. However, there's 2 things that are going to make me pick Sacramento State in this game. First off, Colorado State sucks. If anybody's watched anything from that team, they are ass. Second, this is absolutely the game on their schedule they are going to overlook. They do not have a win this year. Half of their coaching staff and about a third of their players all went to the University of Nevada. They all came over with Jay Norvell when he got the job after they actually played in a bowl game against each other last year. Super weird situation. Who do they play after Sacramento State? I'm going to give you guys one guess.
Nevada.
They play Nevada. So I'm picking Sac State. This absolutely feels like the emotional overlook slip up against the team you should beat while you're thinking about going back to your home to where half of these guys played last year. The game is in Nevada next week. So I'm going to go with Sac State because of
so, hey, throw it to you another confounding thing for you. It's Sagarin based. Colorado State's one win came over Middle Tennessee State. They're 103 in Sacramento.
Correction, they lost by 2 touchdowns to Middle Tennessee.
Wait, hold up. I need to redo this. Thank you for that correction. I completely misread that. Sac State is ranked in Sagarin as comparable to Middle Tennessee State. So thank you for that fact check. Sorry, dudes. I'm undoing my pick, man. Sac State. No, like when I saw the win, because I saw like a win against a relatively okay team, it's like, okay, hey, that's what will tide me over here. No, dude, you guys are right. Colorado State sucks. Sacramento State is solid. This is another notch. Wouldn't it be sweet for the Big Sky to finish like 2-5 against Mountain West teams this season, with Idaho State picking up like all the losses?
And maybe we'll get Idaho into the Mountain West at this rate. 10 years from now, let's talk. That's a whole nother discussion for a whole nother show. Let's keep rolling. We've got Weber State at UC Davis. Martin, going to kick it to you first.
I'm going with the fighting Nick Webbers.
Which, of course, means Weber State. Weber State, to me, they've put the entire FCS on notice. Their new offensive coordinator, Mikey Mantle, apparently is actually getting reins. He has some free reins to actually do something at Weber, which Jay Hill has not let his OCs do that essentially his entire career. But hey, they missed the playoffs last year, so I guess he learned something. Throw out the Western Oregon games. It's irrelevant. Weber State against Utah State scores 35. Follows it up with 44 against Utah Tech. Yeah, Utah Tech sucks, whatever, but that's 2 solid games in a row. To me, Weber State is a great example of why you should not pay attention to national polls. It's preposterous that Weber State is not like top 4 right now. They have their FCS games are as impressive as their FCS FBS games are as impressive as anyone's. Worst case scenario, I'd easily take Weber State here.
Absolutely. Got to take Weber State here. I know that Utah State, especially Utah State's head coach, has had a rough year, a rough couple years actually. Ended up that he's doing a big thing about mental health this weekend. His wife died of cancer. His dad died shortly after that. His son just committed suicide. Utah State was in a rough shape there, but they got obliterated by Weber State, like 35-7 against a Mountain West school. Is
0 offensive touchdowns.
Yeah. Pretty gross there. Absolutely just shut the door right in Utah State's face. And Utah State won 9 games last year. Utah State was a pretty good team last year. Honestly, we could be talking about Weber State winning this conference outright, getting back to the Weber trend of dominance. I think Weber State rolls over UC Davis. So, second to last game, Cal Poly versus the bye week. Who you guys got?
It's going to be closer than you'd guess, guys. Cal Poly's freshman quarterback, Jane Jones, went down with injury. Spencer Brash looked okay, but Jane Jones is clearly better. No news on Jane Jones's injury because it's Cal Poly, and we never hear anything unless we decide it's deep dive time. But we record 3 episodes a week here at Tubbs of the Club. There's only so many shitty deep dives we have, and we always save those for Northern Colorado. So it's going to be close. But honestly, I think Cal Poly is the only team in the conference that even would want a week 1 bye now.
Martin, you said bye week. I heard it very, very gently behind Brian. Give me your reasoning. Why does the bye week beat Cal Poly?
Just simple. It's the bye week.
Fair enough. I'm going to go with a good solid tie between Cal Poly and the bye week. You can absolutely lose your bye week because Idaho has certainly done it more than a handful of times. Dominique Blackman rings a bell on that one. Finally, the game we have all been waiting to talk about. This is why we saved it for last. It is the Super Bowl of the Big Sky, maybe the Super Shitty Bowl of the Big Sky. Idaho State at Northern Colorado for the game of the century. Martin, who are you taking?
I feel like Brian's got a deep dive. I'm going to keep this short and sweet. Northern Colorado.
Well, look, you got the heavyweights. In Sagarin ratings, Idaho State comes in at 211, last in Big Sky. Northern Colorado, they were trying to stay in that bottom 200, but made a mistake. Ed McCaffrey started the right quarterback finally, and Northern Colorado picked up a narrow win over a very shitty Lamar team last week. So Northern Colorado, they're outside of that bottom 200, sitting at 194. You got to expect McCaffrey's going to do something about that pretty quick. But I think you got to go with Northern Colorado here. Already alluded to it, quarterback new starting quarterback, Jacob Sermon, he has not been all Big Sky or something like that, but he's a significant upgrade for Northern Colorado over Dylan McCaffrey. Maybe that helps set up the rush game because Northern Colorado cannot run on anyone, and Northern Colorado has played two very bad FCS teams that would be below Idaho State in our if Lamar and Houston Baptist were in the Big Sky, they'd be below Idaho State in our power rate rankings. And Northern Colorado came away 1-1 in those games. But Idaho State, they can't run football either. And since Tyler Vanderwall went down with a broken clavicle, so he's out at least another 5 weeks. Well, Idaho State can't throw the ball either. Hunter Hayes is a less annoying version of Dylan McCaffrey in terms of overall production because he's a backup. You don't expect backups to be fantastic. He's young. But I just don't think – I think Charlie Ragle is going to have a way bigger rebuild than Idaho has, what we're used to. And Ed McCaffrey's a year ahead in terms of at least having some transfers come in that you can look at and squint and think, okay, well, I understand how that guy doesn't suck for once. So Northern Colorado, I think, is going to win. But I think this is going to be competitive. Like Dallas is joking about, hey, the Super Bowl, the Big Sky coming in September, guys. I think this will be a competitive game. I just think it'll be a great game if you want to watch teams where someone has to win, but the other team doesn't know how. So like we eventually will land on someone leading at the end. Northern Colorado in my mind is who's going to do it. I think this could be a game that's worth watching at least.
Yeah, worth watching, like watching two blindfolded MMA fighters try to go at each other. That's what this is going to feel like. Or maybe not MMA fighters, maybe guys that watched MMA on YouTube and thought it was worth trying out. Maybe that's what this game is going to feel like. This is going to be a pretty ugly game between the two worst teams in this conference. Northern Colorado, I guess the jury's out. Sermon might be able to make them crawl out of the bottom two and maybe into the bottom three. Got to go with Northern Colorado, though. At least when you talk about Northern Colorado, they at least have the McCaffreys. I know that they're putting the Petrino nepotism game to shame, but they're at least the McCaffreys. Dad had a bunch of success in the NFL. Christian is not related to the NA or the NOCO team, but he's obviously one of the best players in the NFL. His two brothers that are involved with Northern Colorado are unfortunately not him, but what do you do? Idaho State's got nothing. I mean, they're in Pocatello, which is already a giant shithole. There's just nothing positive for Idaho State right now at 3 weeks into the rebuild for Charlie Ragle. So NOCO all the way. Guys, that does it for picking the Big Sky. Just a quick update on our
jump in. I just have to keep our Northern Colorado deep dive going. Northern Colorado at least has a couple talented guys who you could understand if they were on your roster. They're not terrible. Elijah Dotson at running back is not contributing at all at what people thought he would, 3 yards per rush, but he's been all Big Sky in the past. There's 4 receivers, including Dotson, who's running back with 10 catches or more. There's the elements of the not worst team in the league on Northern Colorado. Those don't exist on Idaho State.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That takes us to the end of Big Sky Pick'ems, guys. Just so everyone's aware, Brian and I are both 30-3. Marten is 25-8. But realistically, Marten, you're one game off of us when you take out all of the times you've picked against Montana. So not to toot ourselves on the back, but we all seem to know at least a little bit about the Big Sky. So it's going to be really interesting when we get 4 of these wrong. But until then, guys, we're your experts. That's what we're here for. Any last points, guys, about NAU, about any of the games we just picked? Anything you guys want to get off your chests here at 9:42 p.m.?
Yeah, well, this Big Sky Pick'em was brought to you by patreon.com/Tubs at the Club. Help us out, dude. Support the show. You sign up for your Patreon. You'll get the one and only King Spud stickers sent to you once we cash Patreon check. Or you can also buy the King Spud stickers on your own. 1 for $3, 2 for $5. Just DM us on Twitter. We'll get that taken care of. Thank you in the comment thread there, Marten. Listeners will have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. But hey, look, we're doing 3 shows a week, guys. A pregame, a postgame, and covering the entire Big Sky. You want to support what we're doing, join the Patreon or DM us. If you want to make a one-time donation, we can make that happen.
And I do want to, one of the things we don't advertise as much about our Patreon, Brian has become the world's biggest Vandal insider and often has news to break for people in the Patreon that we just don't talk about here on the show because it's just not something that we discuss too much publicly. So if you're interested in getting to know even a little bit more about Vandal football, our Patreon is the place to do it. But with that, thank you guys for another great episode. If you've been watching us live on YouTube, we thank you. Love getting to interact with you guys in the comments. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or the YouTube replay or anywhere else you could get your services, well, hey, I'm not going to complain about you checking our stuff out. So thank you very much for your time. I'm going to let producer seducer Marten Heemstra pick a random outro that's either going to make me look really funny or really stupid. So Marten,
the Picasso of outros, you mean?
Yes, excuse me.